Today's daf we're going to be learning is Horayot daf chet. Today's daf is sponsored in memory of the 6 citizens killed yesterday in the terrible terrorist incident and for the 4 soldiers that were killed in Gaza. May their memories be a blessing, and may we hear b'sorot tovot b'karov. We're going to get started with our daf. I will mention, as I mentioned the last few days, that number one, there will be no Zoom for the next few days. The shiurim will go up as usual. I did mention there was a little bit of an issue with the website and the posts going up on time, so they might not be up as early as they usually are on days I don't teach, but hopefully they should be up 7 o'clock, and you should be able to, and you should get the daf if you want it earlier. You can get it on a podcast app or YouTube. It'll be up by 5 in the morning, Israel time. Okay, that will be from Wednesday through Shabbat. The post will go up, and then on Sunday, there's usual class on Zoom, and Monday there's no class at all because we're doing the last daf on Sunday, which next lead into, please register for the siyum. The registration is up. We sent it out in links. It went out in an email. If you didn't get it, let us know. I think right now there was some issues with the new website, putting it up on the homepage. Hopefully it'll get up there in the next, by today, hopefully. Then you can find it also on the site. If you have any issues at all, you can email us always at info@hadran.org.il. And anyone who's in Israel and would like to join our siyum in Hebrew on Monday, you're more than welcome. Both siyums have a great program, a great lineup with a lot of the teachers that teach on our Beyond the Daf content. And we'll be doing a demo of the new website, how to use it. That will be very useful at the end of the siyum. Okay. And we also have Julie Mendelson celebrating her siyum Mashas with us. Okay, with that, we will get started. So we ended our daf yesterday with this idea about this machloket Rebbi and the rabbis about the kohen Mashiach, the kohen. Remember, let's do a little organization, okay? I want you to know, I know Horayot is a lot of technical details and a lot of things. First of all, the next few dapim are kind of fun, okay? We're going to get into issues of leaders and some interesting concepts, and we're going to get to learning shelo lishma, v'ra shelo lishma, all sorts of interesting topics. So the kind of cherry on the whatever is coming up. But I do want to make some order of things because it'll help. So this might be very obvious to you, but in case it's not, I'm going to make it very clear. There's 4 sections in Vayikra. We've done this a few times, and I want you to get it really into your head that if you come out of Horayot with something besides all the interesting things about leadership and kind of concepts that we're going to talk about, but also this idea, and about taking responsibility for your actions is a lot really that you can, from a perspective, take, even though we're kind of stuck in the nitty gritty, but really this idea of, somebody sins unwittingly and then has to kind of pay the price for it, right? And get up in a public way. So I made a mistake, right? There's a lot to be said for that. But right now, let's organize what there is. In Vayikra, there's 4 sections. First, it starts Kohen Mashiach, then it goes to the Parhalim Davar Shel Tzibur, the community, then it goes to the Nasi, the king, and then it goes to the individual. And those are 4 different sin offerings. Then you move to Sefer Bamidbar, which today we're going to get to something I mentioned yesterday, which is how do you even know it's talking about Avodah Zarah? Okay, it's obvious to them that in Bamidbar, chapter 15, where it has 2 sections, not 4, one for the community, one for an individual. Okay, that's all it has. Doesn't say anything about Avodah Zarah, doesn't say who the individual is relating to. So what's clear to everybody is the individual includes the kohen and the nasi also, the kohen gadol and the nasi. They don't have their own separate thing. And it's talking about Avodah Zarah, which today we're going to see 3 reasons how the rabbis got to the fact that it's talking about Avodah Zarah, 3 possible drashot. But what we started with yesterday was the kohen is dumped in with everybody else there. Whereas in Vayikra, we split it kind of into 2. The Kohen is much more similar to the Parhalim Davar Shel Tzibur, specifically on the biggest issue there is, which is Shigigat Maaseh versus Halem Davar. Let's review what those terms mean. Shigigat Maaseh means I just made a mistake and did an action on my own. Halem Davar means there was something that was lost, like a erroneous ruling. The court got confused, or the Kohen Gadol got confused and taught something incorrectly, and then, right, by accident, and then followed. So when it's the community, it's the Beitin did it, the Beitin ruled, the people followed. When it's the Kohen Gadol ruled, and the Kohen Gadol followed. Okay? The problem is that when we get to Bamidbar, and the Kohen Gadol gets lumped in with everybody else, to what extent is he lumped in with everyone else? And that was the machloket Rebbi and the rabbis at the end of yesterday's daf. Rebbi said, we lump him in for the korban, and therefore we lump him in for everything, really. He's lumped in, and that means that it's shigigat maaseh, the kohen gadol who sins in idol worship, who has to bring this korban, the seirah, the female goat, that which is the same, the nasi brings the same as the individual, does it in the same way that they do. He just made a mistake and started worshiping idols and thinking it was okay. But not because he issued an erroneous ruling, or maybe he didn't, right? He just accidentally did something. He didn't realize it was about whatever shkaga might be there. But the rabbis say no. While he brings the same korban, and that's where we ended, that they all agree that he brings the same korban, sirah, because it's clear he's included. Nefesh echad includes any individual king, individual kohen gadol, individual person. But he brings it only in the way that the kohen generally brings, helem davar. He has to issue an erroneous ruling and then do it. So that's the machlokes. Now we're talking about where they agree. So starting with our daf now. So we said they agree on which korban, okay? They agree that it's right, just that shabasira. Okay. Now we're going to say they also agree shavin she'ein mivi asham talui. They also both agree that kohen gadol doesn't bring an asham talui. Now, what does this have to do with anything? Well, the drasha is going to have to do with this. Okay. Again, what's an asham talui? Provisional guilt offering. That means that if I'm not sure if I did something that normally would get me a korban chatat, then I have to bring to tide me over until such time I figure it out so that I get atonement for it. Fascinating topic. In fact, it's the topic of din and daf this week, which went up yesterday. Like, what is this asham talui? It's really a crazy radical idea. The kohen doesn't bring an asham talui at all. Why not? So, minal, dichti, v'chiper alav kohen al shigato asher shagag. So it says in the pasuk about the asham talui, in Vayikra chapter 5, the kohen, that's the kohen who's working in the temple, dealing with that sacrifice for whoever it is, atones for the shgaga asher shagag. Double language, you don't need asher shagag. Shagag is the verb about the shgaga that he did. So it's obvious he did it. So why do you need to say shagag? So now the drasha is going to split into Rebbi and the rabbis. They're each going to darshan the same thing, but in a different way. Because of their approach, and now we're going to see why this connects, because of what they think about the kohen gadol, specifically in avodah zarah. Why? Rebbi saval, misha kochet obishgaga. The only person who brings this is someone who, every time, all of his sins offerings that he does, everything that person, any sin offering that person does, is just because of a shigat maaseh, as opposed to the kohen gadol that some are shigat maaseh and some are helem davar. If it's avodah zarah, it's shigat maaseh, and then theoretically it could, but no. Rabbi Meir adds it's someone who because they do the shagag, means chet o b'shgaga. His sin is b'shgaga, meaning he just made a mistake, rather than he made a mistake because it was erroneous ruling. So since it's someone who all the sins that they have to bring sacrifices for are specifically shigat maaseh, yatzazeh, the kohen gadol is out because not ein kol chet o b'shgaga ele behelem davar. Because not all of his chataim are b'shgaga, some are helem davar, meaning all the other mitzvot, whereas avodah zarah is shigat maaseh, but that doesn't mean, right, all aren't. All have to be shigat maaseh. To which the Gemara asks, midi kol k'tiv, it never says all there. Where'd you get this word all that you stripped it in there, right? If it wasn't all, you could say the kohen gadol is included because some of his chataim he brings a sin offering for, meaning, i.e., in avodah zarah would be shigat maaseh. So where do we have this word all? He says yes, in fact it does. It doesn't really say all, but it's included because if it just wanted to teach you shigat maaseh, it just would have said the word shigato. Lamali asher shagag. Why are those extra words there? From there you learn it has to be all his sins are b'shgaga. Skipping the next words because that's just a repeat and they're in parentheses, which means they don't really belong here. Rabbanit, now the rabbis don't have that same drasha because they think the kohen gadol never has shigigat maaseh. So they obviously say much more simply, misha chet o b'shgaga, someone who in general brings for shigat maaseh. He never brings a sin offering for shgaga. Not lo ba'avodat kochavim, the lo b'shar mitzvot, ela b'helem davar shigat maaseh. He always has to do it when it's helem davar with shigat maaseh, and therefore that's not included in the pasuk of asham talui. And therefore, again, this isn't the simple reading of that pasuk. They're all darshaning it, taking it out of context or taking it to a different place. But that's how they darshan it. Okay, new Mishnah. This we actually mentioned yesterday already. The beit din is not liable to bring the par halem davar shel tzibur unless it's on a sin. It has to be that they issued an erroneous ruling and the people followed the erroneous ruling. If the issue that they ruled on was something, that's what we keep talking about, chelev, for example, where if you do it intentionally, you get karet, and if you do it b'shgaga, you bring a sin offering. So for those things that the individual brings a sin offering for, which are things that are as dono karet, those are the things where the parlim davar shel tzibur is relating to. The chen hamashiach, same thing for the kohen gadol. Okay, again, we keep comparing the two. And also in avodah zarah, it's only things that is dono karet shigato chatat. Now you might say avodah zarah, everything. I mean, avodah zarah you get karet for. Everything is in that category in avodah zarah, not necessarily. What would be not? Just a simple lo taseh in avodah zarah. We learned this in Masechet avodah zarah, so it's good review. Let's say you kiss or hug an idol, and that's not the typical way of worshiping that idol. If you do that, it's forbidden, but it's not karet. Okay, moving on now, right? If you remember, if you do any of the four major avodot, like bowing, offering an incense, things like that, right? Burning something for them, those, even if it's not the typical way, it's going to be karet. But this is not usually the way you worship. It's not one of the main ways of worshiping idols, and it's not the typical way of worshiping that particular idol. Then it's going to put it in the category, if both those things aren't true, then it's going to be in the category of not karet. So then you wouldn't bring a parlim davar shel tzibur on that. Minala. Now we want to know, okay, we're going to go like this. How do we know that this is true for the regular sins? How do we know it's true for avodah zarah? And from there, we're going to get to, right, we're going to start, how do we know it's true for regular sins for the parlim davar shel tzibur? Then we're going to say, what about the nasi? What about the individual? What about the nasi? What about the kohen gadol? How do we know also there? Okay, we're going to have to learn from there to there. Then we're going to do how avodah zarah, and then we're actually going to come back and say, well, the answer we gave for the first question, how do we know for all mitzvot that it has to be the parlim davar shel tzibur is only tzadon karet shigato chatat? That's the source. The first thing we're going to bring, someone else darshans that pasuk some other way, and we're going to have to bring a second explanation. So it's going to ping, like we're going to jump back after to the first question. So we're going to ask question 1, question 2, and then go back to question 1 and bring a second answer. Minalan, Ditanya, Rebbi Omeo. So we start with Rebbi. Ne'amar kan aleha, v'ne'amar lahalan aleha. Okay, in our pasuk it says, "Parleim davar shel tzibur v'noda'a chatat asher chatu aleha." Okay, the word aleha means on it. Okay, this is not a very uncommon word. Okay, let's say it simpler. It's a very common word. It's interesting that we're darshaning gezera shava from this word because we're going to take a totally different context and connect it to some other aleha, which comes up in the Horayot, in the forbidden relations. Okay, I'll read it right now. You can't take, a man can't marry or sleep with his wife's sister while she's still alive. Okay, and it says, ervata aleha b'chayeha. Okay, legalot ervata aleha b'chayeha. The word aleha appears there, totally different context. It's a very basic word, but the world in gezera shavas, you only say it when you have a tradition about it. So it's not so crazy. You know, if you have a tradition, it kind of at least helps a little bit. Because otherwise it sounds a little bit absurd that we're connecting these two very basic, unconnected words. So Rebbi says, it says aliyah here, it says aliyah there. Okay, now we can get very simply. Well, that's Horayot. What is Horayot? Horayot, 2 nefashot elu, right? At the end of the section, it says everybody gets karet for all these Horayot. Mal halan davar shesdono karet v'shigato chatat. Just like there, it's something that if you do it intentionally, it's karet, and unintentionally chatat, unwittingly chatat. Avkan davar shesdono karet v'shigato chatat. So the aliyah there is same criteria here. Our aliyah is going to be the same thing. So like I said, later, we're going to come back to this and say, but wait, the rabbis darshan that aleha in the Horayot for something else entirely. So they're going to have to find a different source, but we're only going to get back to that later. So the first thing we have to do is say, okay, eshkachan tzibur, so we got it. The tzibur that brings this, that's their criteria. Mashiach minal, and how do we know the kohen gadol is the same? Well, you should know the answer to this by now. La ashma ta'am, what we kept saying yesterday. Every time we want to learn something, right, we always use la ashma ta'am. It says by the kohen gadol, he does it lashma ta'am. What's lashma ta'am? From there we say all the rules of the am are true for him. So whatever's true for the parlim davar shel tzibur will be true for the kohen gadol. Now, nasi. Okay, I see you're asking, has a man sleep with a woman accidentally? right? It's that he didn't know it was forbidden, right? That's shkaga. If he didn't know it was forbidden to do. That's one possible explanation. There are ways it could be bishka. He thought she was someone else, okay? And then it turns out it was the sister. We've seen some cases like that. It's a little weird, but yes. Okay. Also remember, there's you can't see at night. It's dark. In those days, they had no lights, no nothing. Okay, all sorts of possibilities. Nasi. Yalef mitzvah. So now where do we get the Nasi from? So we got the Parlim Davar Shel Tzibur. We got the Mashiach. Now what about the Nasi? Yalef mitzvot mitzvot. K'tiv gabe Nasi. Again, another gezera shava. Gezera shava from, right, for Parlim Davar Shel Tzibur. Once you have that, there's another word by Parlim Davar Shel Tzibur, and that same word appears by the Nasi. We can learn one to the other. Asacha mikol mitzvot Hashem. Shalot Hasen of Hashem. That's in the Parlim Davar Shel Tzibur. You do one of the mitzvot Hashem. That's by the Nasi. He does one of the mitzvot Hashem. And then by the tzibor, it says, Asu achad mikol mitzvot. Okay? Same word, mitzvot, mitzvot. Ma tzibor da'al shezdo karet b'shigato chatat. Af nasi davar shezdo karet b'shigato chatat. Yachid, how do we know the yachid? And this is the basic halacha. Any korban chatat is always the case, right? I mean, it's actually funny because the definition is that it's davar shezdo karet b'shigato chatat. Okay, so now the yachid, how do we know this? Amarkra v'im nefesh. This we're going to see a few times today. The section with the yachid is the last in the section, if you remember, and it says vi, end. End is a connector word, connector letter. Okay, in Hebrew it's one letter, in English it's a word, but end connects it to the previous section. And then we're going to learn the bottom section from the top section. So whatever's true for the top section, which we just proved, all three are only this, also for the yachid. Now we're going to move on and do the same thing for avodat kochavim. How do we know that when the section in Bamidbar is also talking about zdono karet shigato chatat, which we learned in the Mishnah? How do we know this? That's just the quote from the Mishnah. And where do we get it from? Titano Rabbanit. Again, we're going to quote Braita. This one's going to be a little different. Now, this was removed, okay, from the regular section. In other words, this stands alone. It's a standalone. It wasn't included in the other one that talked about all the mitzvot, right? Well, one of the mitzvot, which we thought meant all the mitzvot. It turns out it meant all the mitzvot minus avodah zarah. So this was taken out, and not only that, but it was even put in a different book completely. But okay, that's not what's important here. Just the point that it was isolated out. So because of that, you might have thought, it's classic midrash halacha, we keep doing this. You might have thought this, that it's not like all the others, and it actually includes any kind of sin. But we saw this yesterday. Gezera shava from Bamidbar to Vayikra, from Vayikra to Bamidbar. It says me'enei, namar lahala me'enei. The word me'enei appears in both places, from the eyes of the people, right? One place was the kahal, one place the edah, but synonymous words. The main point being the word me'enei appears twice. So once we learned it from there, another gezera shava from the Parlim Davar Shel Tzibur, right? We had it from there to the Nasi, and now we have it from there to avodah zarah. Eshkachan Tzibur, okay, that covers the Tzibur pasuk. What about the Yachid in avodah zarah? Yachid, Nasi, Mashiach, which are all learned from one pasuk, right? From the same pasukim. They're all lumped together. Nefesh achat. How do we know minalan? Amarkra ve'im nefesh achat. Again, the vav. And if one nefesh, echad yachid, echad nasi, echad mashiach, kulam echal nefesh echad him. That was a repeat from yesterday. All of those people are included in the nefesh. V'yomat tachtom and alyon. And because of the vav, we learned the bottom section from the upper section. The first section was avodah zarah. From there, we learned to the bottom section. Okay, now, this is all, as I've told you, we're going to get back to. So this was, section one was, what's the source for all sins in Parlim Davar Shel Tzibur, and then in all the other characters, right, all the other individuals. How do we know it's Sodo Karet Shigato Chatat? Then, how do we know in avodah zarah? Now we go back to the first answer and say, Hani Chalaman Mapik Leila Ala Gezera Shava Kedam Ara. If you have this Ala Gezera Shava, great, we got it. Ela leRabbanit Mapik Leila Ala Arayot V'Tzarot. But the rabbis learned something completely different from there. What did they learn? You might remember the first Mishnah in Yavama, you might not, but most of us, if we learned it, we remember it was that crazy Mishnah with the 15 women who they're at Sarot. And okay, what was that all about? This halach is learned from the word aleha. Aleha appears in Yibum, Yavama Yavo Aleha, which is if a man dies without children, then his brother is supposed to marry his wife, his widow. If she happens to be forbidden to him because he's a relative, a forbidden relative, and she can't marry him, she's exempt from yibum, she's exempt from chalitza, she doesn't have to do anything. And not only that, but it exempts her tzara. It exempts her if there's her rival wife. If the man had two wives, then just like she's exempt, also the other wife is exempt as well. And there's no obligation of yibum or chalitza for anybody. Okay, that is learned from the gezera shava of Aleha in the Horayot and the Aliyah of the Yibum. That when there's an erva, it overrides Yibum basically. Okay, there's no chiyuv Yibum, and it exempts right completely even the tzarot. So that's all learned from Aleha. How they learn, I'm not going to get into right now. But if you use Aleha for that, then davar shas no karet b'shigato chatam menalu. Then where are you going to learn there's no karet in the shigato chatam? Nafkale midimat ele Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi libulei. He's going to learn it from some other pasuk. So here comes the second source for davar says no karet shigato chatat, specifically by regular mitzvot, not avodah zarah. Avodah zarah we're set with. The end of that section in Bamidbar, the very last pasuk. So again, Bamidbar starts off with the tzibur, moves to the yachid, the individual, and the last pasuk about the individual says the following: Torah achat yelachem lo se b'shgaga. There's one rule for all the people who do b'shgaga. Okay, the Torah achat. There's one way of doing it. The next pasuk is v'hanefesh asher ta'asena b'yad ramah. Okay, so now it says this is the next section. It's already moving on to a different topic, but it says hanefesh asher ta'aseh b'yad ramah umin ager et Hashem umigadef. Sorry, min ha'ezrach umin agel, whether he's an ezrach or a ger, and a citizen or an outsider. Et Hashem hu migadef. Okay, ger. I don't remember there the ger whether it's talking about right here. It's probably talking about a ger who converted. Okay, et Hashem hu migadef. He curses God. Okay, or he's desecrating the name of God somehow. V'nichrita nefesh hi mikerav hama. Okay, and he gets karet. That's the first thing to note here. Karet is mentioned in that pasuk, and then it says the next pasuk is dvar Hashem baza. He totally went against the word of God, which they understand to mean avodah zarah. Okay, so now they're going to say the following. There's karet there, and then it says Torah achat yelachem. So what do they learn from here? Hukshu kol Torah kula avodat kochavim. We're going to compare the Torah achat, and then the mention of avodat kochavim, and karet says we're going to compare the whole thing to avodat kochavim. So remember, he doesn't have the drasha aliyah, but he does accept the drasha for avodah zarah. So once you have avodah zarah, is davar shas no karet b'shigato chatat. מה עבודת כוכבים שחייבים על זדונה קרב על שגתו חטאת, אף כאן שחייבים על זדונה קרב על שגתו חטאת. So from there, we're going to learn to everything else. So the psukim in the Avodah Zarah section, which mentioned karet also, and also we learned anyway, Avodah Zarah is karet. So from there, we're going to learn back to the others because of this Torah chat. There's one rule for everything. That's really what it's saying. So if we learn for Avodah Zarah, we can learn it for everywhere else. Eshkachan, Yachid, Nasi, Mashiach, Bein Bavodat Kochavim, Bein B'shar Mitzvot. Okay, so that got us Yachid, Nasi, Mashiach, because that was in that pasuk there. Torah Chat was in the pasuk about the individual. Now we have to say tzibor minalam. Where do we get the tzibor from? Very simply, there's the vav. Now, until now, we keep saying the vav is at the end, and it connects, right? What was learned above teaches you about below. Now we're going to do the reverse. The vav is on the second part, the yachid. Same vav we darshan before, but now we're going to darshan the other direction. We're going to say the vav is the connector. It connects also with the reverse. We can learn the upper part, the earlier section, from the lower section, from the later section. So once we learn it for the yachid, we can learn backwards to the tzibor. The Rebbi, now we have to finish up this ping pong, because what we did was we said, well, the rabbis don't have the Aleha. They need this other drasha. What drasha? They take Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's drasha. But now the problem is, wait a minute. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi's drasha, what is the Rebbi who already has a different drasha, doesn't need this drasha? What does he do with those psukim, the Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi darshan? So, my avale, what does he do with those psukim of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi? He uses those psukim, that pasuk, Torah chat yelachem, lo se b'shgaga, for something else. Now we're going to get off on a total tangent because we're just trying to figure out what he does with that pasuk, okay? Because we already finished with him for our purposes. Lefisha matzinu shechalak katuv ben rabim liyichidim. Now we're going to talk about something else entirely. Ir hanidacha. Remember, we have a city where all the inhabitants worship idols, or the majority of inhabitants. What are the rules, if you remember? That's exactly what we're going to say right now. What's the difference between Rabim, a city that worships idols, and Yechidim, individuals who worship idols? Well, Rabim b'saif u'mamonam avad. all the inhabitants of the Ir Nidachat get saif. They die by the sword, killed by the sword in the court. And, okay, which is a lighter punishment. We're going to see then the individual in a regular case who worships idols. And so that's like a leniency. On the other hand, all their property is destroyed. You bring all the property into the middle of the city and you burn it. Whereas an individual, yichidim b'skila u'mamonam palat. The yichidim, an individual who worships idols, gets the harshest punishment, stoning, but his property is not destroyed. Her property is not destroyed. Now, here comes the catch. Comes Rebbi and he says the following. Now, I want you to realize in our case, we have a yachid who worships idols, and we have a tzibur, which is the majority of the people who worship idols. We don't have an ir nidachat. An ir nidachat is neither. It's not an individual really, but it's not the majority of the people of the people in Israel, right? Remember we said we go by the people in Israel, not the majority. It's just the majority of a city, but not the majority of the people. So it's not a parlim davar shel tzibur. Now, what if you had an ir nidachat? Ir nidachat is intentional. What if you're an ir nidachat? There was a mistake, like somebody taught, we all should worship, idol, whatever, taught the city, and then the city all followed or something like that. Or just, let's say they all just did it on their own, okay? Accidentally, they thought it was okay. They didn't realize it was avodah zarah, something like that. So now, lefishim, so it starts off like this. Since there's a distinction between them in an intentional case, then maybe you would think, maybe there's a unique korban for an ir nidachat that accidentally worships idols. Okay, we didn't see such a thing, but that's what we're saying. Talmud Lomar Torah Yelachem. The Torah pasuk is saying these people are like individuals, and they're going to bring the same korban that the individuals bring if they worship idols. There's no unique korban for the ir nidachat that unwittingly decides to worship idols. Okay, now we're going to have a question on this kind of strange havamina that Rebbi suggests. Okay, that's why we need this pasuk. You're basically saying, he says to him, you're saying because the Torah didn't distinguish and didn't give a third section of an ir nidachat that worships, right? A city that unwittingly worships idols. Halakhic, if it did, havamina nachlok. You want to say, right? You would have thought it would have its own unique korban. Now comes an interesting question. He says, my nate. What are they going to bring? And what he basically wants to prove is that the havamina of Rebbi here, or that we're claiming Rebbi would say, is a ridiculous havamina because there is no other korban. Every korban is taken. Okay, we're going to go through a list. I don't know if it's really true. Maybe come up with something, but we're going to say, if you want to say this one, someone's got it. If you want to say this one, someone's got it. We're going to go through a whole list. Nete par, bring the bull. Well, sibor b'shar mitzvot u'demaite. Okay, this is a good review for us. Who brings the bull? The community. If they make the parlim davar shel tzibor. Nete par la'olav seir lachatat. How about a par as a burnt offering and a seir and a goat as a sin offering? Where do we have that? That's the korban that the community, if they all follow the mistaken ruling of the court for avodah zarah, that's what they bring. So that one's taken. Nete seir, bring a male goat. Nasi b'shar mitzvot udemaite. That's what the nasi brings if he sins in a regular mitzvot. Nete seira, how about a female goat? Yachid nami hainu korbanot. That's the chid's korban, the individuals. So basically, they go through the list and they say everything's taken. Okay, it's derive. No, you still need it. Why? We have the par and the seir for avodah zarah, but this one's the burnt offering and that one's the sin offering. Maybe swap it and do the reverse, and then you'd have a unique korban. So we got one. Second option is inami. This is an interesting one. Starich ve'en lo takana. Maybe he needs, and that's what the havamina would be. Again, this is all just the hypothesis, which is rejected. But that an ir nidachat that sins unwittingly would have to bring its own unique korban, but there is no unique korban for them to bring, and therefore they're stuck, and there's no way they can ever get atonement for that. That's what means ein lo takana. They have no way to resolve this. But kamash malan, that's why you need the pasuk Torah chat. No, they're the same as everybody else. As the individuals, they're going to bring just the individuals. Now, now here comes what I said. This third part for today. Okay, first part was let's learn avodah zarah, right? Where do we learn Farber, which we had two answers, Alea, or right that it's karet and it's something that's don't know karet, or Torah chat yelachem. We had a bit of ping pong between them. What did they do? What does this one do with that pasuk and that? Then avodah zarah we had, and then how do you learn from parlim davar shel tzibor to all the others, or maybe from the others to parlim davar shel tzibor? Okay, that we resolved. Now we have to figure out this other question. How do we know that those psukim are talking about avodah zarah, right? It never says avodah zarah in the psukim. Okay, what does it say? It says, sorry, I'm just going to open it. It says, Kitish tasu et kol. I want to read these psukim because we're going to darshan them in 3 different ways. If you make a mistake and you don't do et kol hamitzvot ha'ele, all these mitzvot, asher diber Hashem al Moshe, that God spoke to Moshe. Et kol asher tziva Hashem alechem biyad Moshe. Notice the repetition. Everything that God commanded Moshe. Okay, first said God spoke to Moshe, and then said God commanded Moshe. Seems to be saying the same thing. Min hayom asher tziva Hashem v'halal adorotechem. From the first day that God commanded for all future generations. That's a very strange pasuk. That second pasuk. We're going to darshan this. So it doesn't say avodah zarah anywhere. So why is it so obvious to them? It's avodah zarah. So like I said, we're going to have 3 answers. My mashma, where do you get it from? I'm a rabbi. Maybe it was anonymous. Okay, we have either Rabbi said it, either Rabbi Shobin Levi or anonymous, or there's different explanations of what k'di means. Some people say it's someone's name. Anyway, Amar Kra. I mentioned this yesterday. This is the most famous one. Okay, what mitzvah is like all the mitzvot? And it's obviously not all the mitzvot because all the mitzvot we already had in Vayikra. So it's got to be one particular mitzvah. What could it be? The one that's as weighty as all the other mitzvot. That's idol worship, right? It's the basic of everything. Going back to Avodah Zarah, Masechet Avodah Zarah. Okay, now, next one. Dibei Rebbi Tana, Amar Kra, Asher Diber Hashem Moshe, Uchtiv Asher Tziva Hashem Alechem B'Yad Moshe. Now they're going to darshan this. God spoke and God commanded. Where do we have a commandment that God spoke and commanded Moshe? Right? God said those explicitly. And then remember, according to the people got scared, didn't want to hear God, right? And then God stopped talking. But those commandments were the ones that the people heard. And then also he commanded Moshe all sorts of things about avodah zarah throughout the Torah. So that must be avodah zarah. Debei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, the third one, turning out Amabet, Lemin hayom asher tziva Hashem b'hala l'dorotechem. Ezuhi mitzvah shene'amra b'tchila. What was the first mitzvah commanded? Okay, before we read this inside, what's the first mitzvah? Actually, Pru-Revu. Okay, that comes up in Breshit. And then there's Brit Milah, and then there's Gida Nasheh. Okay, then there's HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. There's all sorts of mitzvot before. Then we're going to see the Gemara relates to there's Mara before they got to the giving of the Torah. They got, according to the Midrash, they got 10 mitzvot there. So this is a bit of a strange Gemara. Now, why avodat kochavim? Because it's the first of the 10 commandments. Okay, so when they got the Torah, it was the first of the 10 commandments. But didn't they say that there's 10 mitzvot they were commanded beforehand? Okay, first of all, it says Sham Sam Lo Chok Umishpat. That's where they put in Chok Umishpat. And they're going to quote here in the parentheses though, Vayam Shemot Shema L'Kol Hashem Lokecha, and there it says Vayashar Be'einav Ta'aseh Va'azanta L'Mitzvotav V'Shamarta Chukav. Now the mitzvot and the chukim, this is mentioned before the Torah was given. So how do you explain that? It must be they got mitzvot before, and then there's these 10 mitzvot, and I'll tell you in a second something about that. But so they reject this last answer. It can't really be because it's the first one. Okay, and again, that was from the words from the day that God commanded you, meaning the first mitzvah God commanded. So the topic of Gefet this week of Rabbanit El Shimoni's, which went up last night, is specifically about this topic. I think it's up on the site. I'm not sure. If not, it will be up later this morning. This basically, it's definitely on YouTube, so you can, and should be on Spotify already, or podcast apps. The main thing here is that it's a fascinating topic, like what's considered the first mitzvah and how do we view mitzvah from before Matan Torah? And she brings up 2 different approaches. Very interesting shiur. Okay, again, if you're looking for some other stuff in Horayot other than the tedious technical drashot that we've been back and forth and all the complicated discussions, these are good shiurim to kind of delve into and see things a little bit differently. Okay, new Mishnah. Okay, now we're going to get into this whole topic, which is going to bring us to through the next stuff, which is what we've been talking about now. So it has to be zadon karet shigato chatat. Now we're going to limit it even more. There's 2 different types of chatat offerings. One is the regular chatat, like for chelev, where you bring a sin offering and it's an animal. Okay, we had the Yachi brings this one, the Mashiach, all those bring what they bring. But then we have other thing called a sliding scale offering, which we spent a lot of time on in Shavuot, right? There's if you don't give testimony, right? You have testimony, you don't give it, and you swear you don't know it, and then it turns out you lied. If you went into the mikdash and you're impure by accident, okay, or ate sanctified meat or sanctified something while you're impure, or the meat was impure and you ate it, okay, things like that. And then we have the just eluding me. Oh, bitois fatayim. I swear I'm going to do something, and then I don't keep my oath. Those three, you bring the sliding scale offering. Remember what that means? It means if I'm rich, I bring an animal, okay, and a particular animal. If I'm not so rich, I can bring two birds instead. If I'm not that rich, I can bring a meal offering, okay, if I'm really poor. So it's a sliding scale offering. We're now going to say, basically, in other words, but you're not going to be liable, the parhalim davar shel tzibur, unless it was a sin that you would have been liable for a chatat kfu'ah, set chatat. So that's what they're going to basically say. If you sin having to do with the temple, okay, first of all, testimony, there wouldn't be something testimony for the whole community, and there wouldn't be bitois fatayim for the whole community. So the only thing that's relevant for the whole community is the mikdash, the tumat mikdash. Let's say everybody came into the mikdash because they said this isn't tameh, whatever it was, and everybody became tameh that way, and they all came into the mikdash. You're not going to bring a parlim davar shel tzibur. Not only that, also the asham talui is not applicable for this sliding scale offering. But you are obligated if it's an asay and a lo taseh of nida, which is karet, okay, and a chatat kfu'ah. That has both the criteria, both its karet nida, and you bring a regular sin offering for it, the animal. And also, if you're not sure if you made and did a sin there, you would bring this provisional guilt offering. What's a good example of a mitzvah aseh in nida, right? Usually they're lo taseis of nida. Well, prosh min nida. When the woman is expected to get her period, the husband and wife have to separate. So that's a positive commandment, and that comes from the zartan. You should stay far away from tum'ah. That means when a woman's expected to have to separate, that would be an aseh. Mitzvah lo taseh al tavo al nida. Don't have relations with the woman in nida. Now the Gemara wants to know, Menani Mile, did Tzibur lo machayve korban ba'alma, v'yachid asham talui namilo. How do we know these two halachot in the Mishnah? That the parlim davar shel tzibur, right, is not going to be relevant for this sliding scale offering. And how do we know that an individual won't bring an asham talui if they sinned, right? If they're not sure if they did one of the three things that you bring in korban olev yoreg, you won't bring an asham talui. So Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi, ne'amar va'ashem b'chatat u'ba'asham talui, ne'amar va'ashem u'b'tzibur. Ma asham b'yachid b'chatat kfu'ah, af asham u'b'tzibur b'chatat kfu'ah. We're going to do a three-way gezera shava. It says, okay, I'm going to read you the psukim. Vayikra daled kaf zayin, im nefesh echad tachtav shkaga me'am haaretz basotach ha mitzvot asher lo te'asena ve'ashem. That's by the individual. Im nefesh ki tachtav asa achad mikom mitzvot Hashem asher lo te'asena ve'lo yada ve'ashem v'nasa avono. Okay, that's, 1 second. No, I think I'm reading the wrong pasuk. Right. That's the asham talui pasuk. Nefesh ki techtav asta acham mikom mitzvot Hashem asher lo te'asena ve'lo yada. He's not sure. Okay, that's the asham talui. That's v'ashem. So we have ashem by the yachid. We have ashem by the asham talui, and we have im kol adat Yisrael yishku v'ne'elam davar me'nei hakahal asher lo te'asena v'ashem. So we have three versions of the word ashem in those three places. That teaches what's right. The asham talui is only for when a yachid, the key pasuk is the yachid bringing the sin offering. The sin offering the yachid brings is the animal. That's the set one. So the set one is only relevant, right? The parlim davar shel tzibur is only for the set one, and the asham talui is only for the set one. Because both parlim davar and shel tzibur and the asham talui have the word v'ashem, which connects it to the ashem of the yachid. From there we learn it. Well, comes the Gemara and says, what kind of gezera shava is this? Oh, sorry, I just didn't read the last words here, I think. So let's just read it. So, Hashem u'b'tzibur, ma v'ashem b'yachid b'chatat kfu'ah, just like b'yachid, it's the chatat kfu'ah. That's what I just said, it's the set one. Af v'ashem u'b'tzibur b'chatat kfu'ah. So the parlim davar shel tzibur is also only going to be this set chatat. Umat tzibur b'chatat kfu'ah, af asham talui nami, and then from there we get to the asham talui. But then here comes the question. Amre ihachi korban olev yorei nami. Hakti vayaki ye'asham lecha me'ele. The same root, ye'asham. comes up also in asham talui. So then you could say, comes up in olev yored, in the sliding scale. So why don't we say, here, it also appears there. Paralim devashal tzibor, also there. Asham talui, also on a korban olev yored. And that basically undermines the whole gezera shava. So they say, no, danim ashem min ashemo, ve'ein danim ashem asham. Okay, we don't learn asham from asham. It's a different grammatical conjugation of the word. The Gemara says, my nafkamina, they love to bring this example. Every time they try to claim it's a different, right? It's their best excuse. Oh, well, they took the root and used it in a different way because it has a yud before it. It's different. Say, what are you talking about? And here we quote, we always love quoting this, the case of the leper. Okay, when it comes to the leper, Tani Debe Rabbi Ishmael, it's the most radical gezera shava there is. We're going to compare shava kohen and ba kohen. Now, shava and ba are two completely different words, not the same root. They happen to be synonyms. They both mean the kohen came, okay? He returned and he came. Same thing. But they're two completely different words, okay? If we say asham and asham are different, they're not really much different, right? So asham means in the future, but it's the same exact word. Here we take two words and we're going to make a gezera shava. Zoe shiva, zoe bia. Okay? We make a gezera shava there. What's the gezera shava? I'll say it very simply. A leprous house. What happens? The kohen comes, he checks out the house. Then he says, oh, I'm not sure. Let's wait 7 days. If after 7 days it spreads, then he's supposed to do a process. It says in the Torah where you take the stones out, you scrape them, you scrape all the stuff off, and then you re-plaster them. Well, I don't know the exact word, but you do a process to them. Then it says, but if it didn't spread, you wait another 7 days. Now, when it says after the first 7 days, it says v'shava kohen. The kohen comes back after 7 days to check, and if it spreads, if it doesn't spread, if it didn't spread, you go back 7 days later. And there it says uba kohen, and the kohen comes back to the house, but it uses a different word. And then it doesn't say if it spread what you're supposed to do. So they learn that whatever it says you're supposed to do the first time, if it spread, that's obviously what you're supposed to do the second time. That's what the gezera shava teaches. Okay. Ve'od. So number one, don't try to say, asham is not. And then we're back to this gezera shava doesn't work because then it would teach the opposite. Also, korban olev yoreh, which is exactly what we're not looking for. Ve'od. And furthermore, ne'elaf min ve'asham mitumat mikdash v'kodashah. Dichtivu tamei v'ashem. If you don't like asham, in one of the examples of korban olev yoreh, which is the relevant one for the tzibur, which is the tumat mikdash going into the temple, it says v'hu tamei v'ashem, explicitly the same ashem word. So Amar Papa, it's fine, I'll fix this. Danim ashem u'mitzvot Hashem min ashem u'mitzvot Hashem. Okay, in that section appears both ashem and mitzvot Hashem. Okay, that's how you can get to in all three places. It says also ashem, also mitzvot Hashem. The Rav Papa says that's not good enough. If you're going to take two words, I'll give you two words that appear in the paralim devashal tzibur and also appear in the korban olev yoreh, the sliding scale offering. And I'll say take those two words, v'nasa avono, and learn that it's specifically in a sliding scale offering, which again goes against the Mishnah. To which he finally comes up with, no, I got three words. Okay. Amar le el amar of Nachman bar Yitzchak danim v'ashem u'mitzvat Hashem asher lo te'asena me'ashem u'mitzvat Hashem asher lo te'asena. We have three words, okay, and then we're good. V'al yochiach shmiat kol u'bitois patayim v'tumat mikdash v'kodashav, which is all the sliding scale offering options. Shelo ne'amar bahen v'ashem u'mitzvat Hashem asher lo te'asena. It's missing the asher lo te'asena, and therefore we make the gezera shava for the chatak fu'ah, and we don't make it to the sliding scale offering. Okay, continuing along this topic, and we'll get much more into it tomorrow. We'll see even more opinions, but the Mishnah now quotes, we're going to talk now about the Nasi. What about a king? Is a king obligated also only in a chatak fu'ah? Is also in a sliding scale offering? Okay, there's going to be a range of opinions, both about the Nasi and the kohen. Are they included or not included in the sliding scale offerings? Would they bring a chatat if they sin on those? Maybe some, not others. Okay, we're going to see a range of opinions. Altogether 4. So now we're going to start with 2. So this is just a continuation of the previous Mishnah. On a paralim devashal tzibur, it's not going to be for all 3 things that you bring a korban olev yoreh, and the Nasi just the same. Okay. Also, a Nasi is not obligated in any of those. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Galili. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Nasi chayav bekulan. There's only one the Nasi is not chayav. What's that? Mishmiat chutz mishmiat kol. Why? Shmiat kol is if you heard testimony, you had testimony, you didn't testify, and you swore you didn't know it. Well, a king, never would do that. Why? Remember Sanhedrin, second chapter? HaMelech lo dam v'lo danimoto lo me'iv v'lo me'idinoto. A king can't testify, so he'll never be part of that. Okay? Now we're going to understand where Rabbi Yossi Aglili comes from, and with that we'll finish for today. And then later we're going to see more opinions and other things. Amar Ula, my time at Rabbi Yossi Aglili. What's his reason? Amar Kras. So they're going to start with one and then reject it and bring a different. Vayaki asham lechat me'ele. Okay, that's where in the pasuk about the sliding scale. So we say one of these, that means one for all and all for one. You're either in or you're out. So what does he say? Since you can't, if you're not part of one, then you're not part of any of them. Well, the Melech can't testify, so he's not part of Shmiat Kol, which means he's not part of any of them. But the Gemara says, you can say Echad Mikulam means one of the many, meaning could be he's only chayav in one. In other words, you could put that in both directions. Ella, so they give a different answer. Talmud Rabbi Yossi Aglili Mehacha, and this you're going to have to wait for tomorrow to see. Okay, he's going to bring a different answer, which I'll give you the gist of. A melech can never be poor, and therefore he's not part of this whole sliding scale offering, because the sliding scale offering assumes that you could be in a dire financial straits, and the king will never be in dire financial straits, and therefore he's just not part of the whole sliding scale offering at all. Okay, and that's a different reason. So we'll get back. Tomorrow's topic is really all about this. Okay, so what did we do today? We started with this, both agree, Rebbi and the rabbis, about the kohen gadol doesn't bring an asham talui, and we proved that from a pasuk. Then we moved to the davar no karet shigato chata. We had two answers, two explanations, two different drashot as to where we get it from for regular mitzvot. We have one for the avodah zarah, and then each time we had to learn from there to all the other characters, not only the tzibur, also the yechidim and the nasi and all that. And the avodah zarah was actually about the yechidim, and from there we learned to the that also we learned from the tzibur first. Okay, then we had a bit of ping pong back between the two different opinions and how does each one darshan the other's pasuk, or how does the pasuk that the second drasha is, how does the first person darshan that pasuk? And from there we got off on a tangent, and then we gave three answers. The last one was rejected as to how we know that those pasukim b'midbar are talking about idol worship. Then we got to the fact that we started with the tzibur. The tzibur only brings parlim davar shel tzibur if the sin was a chatat kvuah. If the sin was something like a sliding scale offering, for example, the tumat mikdash v'kodashav, that was the only one that was relevant to the tzibur. There's no parlim davar shel tzibur. We saw the source for that, which in the end was this gezera shava that we had to kind of expand on to include three phrases that were the same, also there, and also to teach that the tzibur doesn't ever bring an asham talui. And from there we finished with what about the nasi, and we saw machloket. Two opinions, and we're now in the middle of figuring out what the source of their opinions is. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day. Let's hope today is a day with better news, a more peaceful day, and wishing everyone a good day.